Week 6 class exercise, macro depth of field. This week, you will be playing with macro shooting depth of field. Without expensive specialty macro lenses, I want you to experiment with a variety of situations. So you're going to play with, in this week's exercise, the aperture, if you have that control. We're going to try to deal with large apertures. Now, if your camera does not have specific aperture settings, you're going to want to probably look for a portrait scene mode. Some of you might have a macro mode, so play around with some of those settings. I know some cameras actually have a food mode, which of course has a fairly large aperture setting. So we're looking for a smaller f-stop number, which will open up our aperture. We're dealing with some shutter speeds here, and I want you to mostly just pay attention. Of course, if you have a smaller aperture, more light needs to be brought in so the shutter remains open longer. So you're dealing with a slower shutter speed, whereas if you have a large aperture, the shutter does not stay open very long at all. It's very quick because we don't need a whole bunch of light coming in. Focusing, you're going to deal with focusing here. The flash, try not to use it. If you have a flash that fires, you might want to just diffuse it by either putting some tissue paper over top of your flash or sellotape, or use another light source. Flashlights, you turn on the flashlight on your phone. Use a lamp or a crafting light. There are so many ways that we can use a different light source. We're going to talk about light in a few weeks. If at all possible, natural light will work the best. ISO, lower numbers mean that those sensors are less sensitive to light. Higher numbers are more sensitive to light. So if you are in a bright situation, you're going to have a lower ISO. If you're in a darker, dimmer situation, you're going to have a higher ISO. Remember, the negativity with a higher ISO means that you might get some grain. With this week's exercise, you will be taking a minimum of 5 photos. And the following are items to concentrate on: unique perspective, composing the frame, meaning place your subject off center using the rule of thirds for an example. Tripods. No blurry images are allowed. If you submit a blurry photo, I will not grade it. So you need to steady your shot with either a true tripod or anchor your arm, anchor the camera some way, somehow. So with the depth of field, we're dealing with aperture, focal length, image size, and distance from the subject. So you're going to be taking a minimum of 5 photos, and you're going to try for a sequence where the point of focus changes within the same scene. So this is what you're going to do. You're going to set up a scene. And my example would be like I'm showing you right now. Get 3 objects and try to utilize that circle of confusion that we talked about. Have a middle object and then have one that's slightly in front of and slightly behind, but that we can see all 3. So by doing that, we're going to play with a smaller aperture where everything was in focus, and we're going to deal with a larger aperture for macro photography where only the subject is in focus, which will be the middle. So for a small depth of field, number 1 that you need to take, move your camera closer to the subject, use a high magnification and a large aperture. Some of you that don't have those aperture settings, again, change it to portrait, change it to macro, and get close. So we want a small depth of field. Photo number 2 will be a large depth of field. Move the camera away from the subject. Use a low magnification. Use a small aperture. So those are your first 2 photos that you will be submitting. Number 3, you're going to attempt to do a little bit of bracketing, but bracketing as far as depth of field. So you're going to, again, take those 3 objects that you lined up. Think about that circle of confusion. Place them at this point about 6 inches apart. And what I want you to do is, for the first picture in this third part, you're going to focus on the first object, and the second and third are out of focus. For the second photo, you're going to focus on the second one, and the first and the third are out of focus. And for the last photo in this third part, you're going to focus on the third one, and the first two are out of focus. So you're going to be playing a little bit with some of the settings. I know some of you are going to be a little frustrated. One of the things to think about is to make sure that your scene is very well lit. For those of you with just a point and shoot camera, make sure that you have a very well lit scene, because the photos are not going to take right. It's not going to focus if it can't see what in the world it's trying to focus on. So you will be submitting these 5 photos. Make sure they are labeled appropriately. If I have to guess, they're not going to be graded. And I will make a note in feedback in the Dropbox saying, please label, try again. So it would be okay to put these in a PowerPoint or some sort of PDF document. Make sure that you are taking these photos this week. Do not use old photos. You need to be taking these photos this week so I can see you're playing with the camera, you're figuring things out. I will post a discussion item for week 6 if you have concerns and questions as you're taking the photos for this exercise. I would encourage everybody to be involved with that and help each other out, and answer those questions.